Thank you for joining us for this In Conversation event between B1% and Magnus MacFarlane-Barrow of Mary's Meals. My name is Jan Carlyle and I'm on the board of B1%. Every year we celebrate our B1% birthday and each year is a little different, and this year is no exception. B1% is a collective of individuals who give 1% of our income each month to help the world's poorest people. We fund projects in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals: no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, and many more. We are a collective of givers, and each month our regular gift is combined and given to projects that are already established in the world's poorest countries, and we work with partner organisations. Mary's Meals is one of those partner organisations. We've been working with Mary's Meals since 2011. Mary's Meals is a global movement to set up school feeding projects in communities where poverty and hunger prevent children from gaining an education. And it was established in 2002. It provides daily life-changing meals in schools for over 750,000 hungry children every school day. B1% has raised £129,028 for Mary's Meals over the time we've been working with them. And B1% currently feed 760 children a day in 3 different schools in Malawi and Liberia. Shortly, I'll introduce you to Magnus and Bob. You can use the chat function if you want to talk amongst yourselves, or if you have any questions for Bob and Magnus, we'll be asking them at the end of their conversation. Please type your questions in capitals and the team will make sure that we collate those questions and ask as many of them as we can to Bob and Magnus. So Magnus, we are honoured to have you join us this evening.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honour for me to be with you, so thank you for asking me on.
Thank you so much. As I mentioned, Magnus founded Mary's Meals in 2002. He's the chief executive of Mary's Meals that feeds 1.6 million children daily. He's been recognised as a CNN hero. He's been named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people and written a Times and Sunday Times bestseller, The Shed That Fed a Million Children, the story of Mary's Meals. And also he's just written a new book called Give, Charity and the Art of Living Generously, which I'm looking forward to finding out a little bit more about. Magnus's life changed in 1992 when he was enjoying a pint with his brother and they stumbled across an idea that would both change his life and radically change the lives of other people. After watching a news bulletin about war-torn Bosnia, they took a beaten-up Land Rover and they decided to help and make a difference in other people's lives. And that would become Magnus's life's work, leading him to leave his job, sell his house, and direct all of his efforts towards feeding thousands of the world's poorest children. Welcome, Magnus. And welcome to you, Bob. I've known Bob for over a decade and we serve together on the B1% board.
Really nice to be here, and thanks for hosting in such a great way. Thank you.
It's great to have you with us. As I mentioned, Bob is the chair of B1%. He's a trustee on the board of the Fairtrade Foundation. He's Professor of Marketing and Chair of Agrifood at the University of York. He's the principal investigator of I Know Food, which is a 4-year research project which is about food resilience and funded by the Global Food Security Fund. Bob is a senior policy fellow for DEFRA, and before moving into academia, Bob was head of sales and marketing at the Fairtrade social enterprise Divine Chocolate. And his passion for development was ignited really when he did a stint at VSO after he graduated from university, where he volunteered in northern Tanzania at the Mondulu Agricultural College near Arusha. So welcome to both of you. I'm going to still be on the webinar and I'll be collating the questions in the background, but over to you, Bob, as you lead us for this In Conversation.
Thanks, Jan, and good evening, Magnus. It's really good to be involved in this event with you. You're one of my heroes, so it's always nice to do that. And yeah, I think also welcome to everybody who's joined this evening. It's one of those wonders of modern technology that we're able to speak to you, Magnus, in Oban, in Argyllshire, some people in York, some people in Liverpool, some people in London, and we even have some international listeners as far afield as the United Arab Emirates. So that's quite amazing, wonder of modern technology, really. Yeah, I mean, I think I've been transfixed by problems in the food system all the way through my life, really, starting with my VSO experience in northern Tanzania. And then recently, really with my work on the I Know Food program, where we work with farmers, we work with retailers and manufacturers of food, but also consumer groups as well. And looking at the grand challenges, climate change, poor governance, and what we're going to be talking about tonight is this kind of, problem with food insecurity and hunger, which really is one of our key themes within B1%. And interestingly, one of our key themes within our research program at the University of York as well, in I Know Food. And what's interesting, I think, about this particular topic is if you look at the context globally, Magnus, and you'll know this, is from about 2010 to 2015, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goal of zero hunger and food insecurity, we actually observed progress. So the figure of people who were going hungry went down to 777 million people globally. But actually in the past 5 years, it's increased again to a really worrying figure of 821 million, which out of a population of 7.8 billion is a significant percentage. And that's globally. But if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, that percentage is obviously even greater. And so this has become a real concern, I think, for a lot of policymakers and right across the world. And obviously it affects children. It discriminates against children in a massive way. And so we should all be concerned about this particular problem. And I think that's why B1% have really focused on it. So I'd just like to ask you, with your experience and your knowledge of what's going on the ground in terms of Mary's Meals, what do you think the causes are of food insecurity and hunger?
Thanks, Bob. And just to say again how happy I am to be on, and how grateful we are in the Mary's Meals family for the support of B1%, and how much I think your mission resonates with our approach, that concept of all of us sharing a little of what we have so that the others can at least eat. So thank you, and it's great to be on to have this conversation with you. And first of all, thank you for your kind words about myself and Mary's Meals. I always feel a little bit nervous, if I'm quite honest, coming on something like this and talking to an expert like you, Bob, who, as well as all the amazing practical things you've done, you're an academic, and I'm absolutely not. I don't claim to be an expert in anything, really. I'm just somebody who's found myself having this experience of being in the middle of this amazing thing that's grown called Mary's Meals. But to answer your question about causes of hunger, I suppose something that I used to think before I got involved in this, and I think maybe many people still kind of assume, is that when we're talking about this kind of hunger, chronic hunger that's devastating people's lives, we're talking about those dramatic situations, those terrible famines caused by drought or by conflict, or those things that we tend to see in the media spotlight now and again, and are quite rightly horrified by and respond to. But most of that chronic hunger we're talking about isn't like that. It's caused by poverty. It's caused by the fact that families are so poor that they can't afford to buy enough food to eat, enough food for their children to eat. So I think chronic poverty and hunger are inextricably linked. They form this horrible cycle. And I suppose that's what Mary's Meals is trying to address, that cycle where poverty causes hunger, and then the impact of hunger causes poverty. So it's self-perpetuating in that way. And it can be a hugely difficult cycle for those caught up in it to ever escape from. And I suppose also another kind of myth that I think is connected to hunger sometimes, and again certainly maybe I've thought this way in the past, but wrongly so, is that hunger is about there not being enough food. It's not about there not being enough food in the world. We know there is enough food in the world for all of us to eat well. It's not like people who have wealth are going to starve even in a famine situation. So there is enough food in the world. It's again, it brings us back to that. This is about hunger is really about poverty. It's a symptom of chronic poverty, and I think to tackle hunger, we have to think about how we tackle poverty as well.
Sure. And what's been interesting for me in my work as well is that when we've been working with smallholder farmers in West Africa and Southern Africa, what's been really worrying is this kind of development of hunger as well in farming communities. People call it the hungry farmer paradox. So you've got farmers who are producing, growing some of the luxuries that we eat on a daily basis, yet they're actually without food. And it's a real, that compounded with poverty and not growing, not being incentivized to grow crops that are cash crops that are do not have any nutritional value, is I've seen that as a really worrying development at the moment, which a lot of us are trying to tackle. And at the same time, these farmers are right at the forefront of climate change as well, which is one of the reasons why we work at B1% on those kind of projects also. Obviously, hunger, and I would say you were an expert because you were an expert on the ground on dealing with these issues on a daily basis in countries like Malawi. Obviously, hunger, when it impacts on children, and I want to talk about the impact now, affects growth. You see stunting. You also impact on this kind of fabric of society and social cohesion, and affects their learning. But what's your experience at Mary's Meals of the impacts of this chronic hunger?
Yeah, Bob, it's a horrible thing, as you'll know, and I think there is always, it's important we talk about the global statistics, and even just listening to you at the outset there, just a reminder of just how enormous the scale of this is, what a huge percentage of humanity is suffering through not having the most basic thing, food. And yet at the same time, there can be a risk in when we talk about the big numbers that we can almost forget about the individual human suffering. That is a horrible reality in the lives of individual children, individual people. And I suppose that's something right at the heart of Mary's Meals. This work of Mary's Meals was really, I suppose, born in response to the words of a child in that situation. I had an experience in 2002 when we were in Malawi. We were involved in emergency feeding programs. That was a year of terrible hunger, terrible drought across southern Africa, and so we were involved in emergency feeding programs, taking food into homes where in villages where people were literally eating the leaves of trees and the roots of trees to survive. And I met this family, and the father of the family had just died before I met them, and the mother was now dying, and she had 6 children with her. And at one point I started talking to her oldest child. He was called Edward. He was 14 years of age, and I think really to try and brighten the conversation, because it was a very, very bleak set of circumstances, I said to him, like you might say to any young person, what's your hope, Edward? What's your ambition? And he just said to me, I'd like to have enough food to eat, and I would like to be able to go to school one day. And that was it. That was all of Edward's ambition at 14 years of age. And that was a moment where I really thought about that cycle of poverty, or that cause of poverty through lack of food, through children like Edward missing school. And I'd encountered lots of children over the years before that missing school because of poverty, children who are begging or working or doing whatever children have to do to try and eat. But I never really thought, deeply about that link, and about the fact that so many children miss school because they're hungry, and therefore they're almost certainly condemned to a life of poverty if they don't even have that benefit, of being able to go to school and gaining that education that can set them free. So that's certainly one of the impacts of hunger that I think sometimes is overlooked, that real impact on the possibility of an education. And then those other things you've already touched on, children, unless they can receive adequate nutrition every day, cannot grow to be the people they're meant to be physically as well. Their development is permanently impaired, and the statistics around that in sub-Saharan Africa today are absolutely shocking. And some of that intervention, as much as possible, needs to come even earlier to try and reach those children at the earliest stages of development. So hunger, that kind of hunger, is a terrible thing. That's just blighting so many people's lives. It's where so many things must start, I think, when we think about development.
Sure, and that's very illuminating, and it'd be nice to hear a little bit more about what Edward's doing now, maybe later in the discussion. But obviously, you decided to take action, and you pioneered the Mary's Meals and the organisation from your place there in Scotland. How does Mary Meals work? What's been your kind of development as an organisation? And we heard some of the statistics from Jan before. You have an enormous impact on the ground, and and I know the participants this evening would like to hear how you do that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Bob. And it's very simple, first of all, and we try to keep it simple in terms of our focus and our mission. So we want to be very careful not to claim to be experts on lots of things. We want to do one crucial thing and do it very well, and that crucial thing is the promise of a daily meal for a child in a place of education. But in terms of how we do that, I think a crucial part of it, and has been from the very beginning, is about recognizing that for this to work, it has to be locally owned. So even at the very beginning, after that conversation I described with Edward, the first thing we did when we started to form this concept was to hold public meetings in Malawi to say to the people who came, look, we've got this idea, but it's only an idea. We won't go forward with it unless you believe in it, unless you want to make it a reality, and then we'll support it. And so from the beginning, that meant that each school community where Mary's Meals is served, they take the day-to-day responsibility. They form teams of volunteers who come in to cook and serve the meals every day, and take responsibility for all involved in that organisation. And then our part becomes about providing the food, and that food, again, crucially, as much as possible is locally sourced. So as much as possible, we want to support the local farmer. We want to support the local economy. So when it's possible to buy that food locally, we do that. So for example, today in Malawi, the program's grown in an incredible way from I think it was 200 children or something we began serving at the beginning, and today in Malawi about 1 million children eat every day at school, and that's about, I think that's about 32% of the primary school population eat Mary's Meals there. But the wonderful thing in Malawi is that we're able to source all of that food those children are eating from it's food that's grown in Malawi. So it's a simple porridge, made of maize, soya, small amount of added sugar, and then fortified with vitamins and minerals. So a good, nutritious dish, but locally available, and according to and meets the taste of the local people. That's what they would ask for, the children in school, if you gave them a choice. In other places, it's more challenging. Some other countries, we manage to do the same thing. And then in situations like, for example, South Sudan today, or Haiti even, they're just simply not growing enough food on a regular basis that allows us to procure all our food locally. Sometimes we make a trade-off saying, in this situation, the priority has to be that the child eats every day. So for periods of time, we may need to import food to make sure that happens consistently. But even in those cases, we're constantly looking for ways that we can move beyond that, whether it's by partnering with people who are doing good work in agriculture and saying to them, look, we can be your guaranteed market. We can say we can buy any food that you can produce for our school feeding program. Or in Liberia, for example, today, there's a huge problem in Liberia with, it's some years now since our civil war, but the civil war really meant that a whole generation almost lost their farming skills. So many of them moved to displaced camps in the city. And it's been a real challenge to get people back to the land and farming again, So there we say to every school, to participate in our program, you must have a school farm, a school garden, and those school farms start to contribute to the program, the food, but they're also this place where students can learn farming skills again, so while as I said, Bob, we're not experts in agriculture, we're not experts in water, we're not experts in HIV/AIDS. All these things connect, don't they, in development. So much of what we do is also rooted in partnership, finding good partners with people that do know what they're doing in those areas, and always rooted in that local partnership first and foremost. So that's just a brief overview of the model and how it works. And we're continually learning, and refining and trying to find ways to do it better, continually looking at ways that always looking for opportunity where we can give responsibility back to the community. We always want it to be a movement in that direction. So for example, at the beginning, we need a kitchen and a store for each school that starts. And at the beginning, we would have funded nearly all of that, and then as time's gone on, we've worked with the communities around what could you do in terms of contributing to the kitchen, and in most countries at this stage, the vast majority of the work and the cost involved in the kitchen is met by the local communities. That might be through them being able to make their own bricks and providing the timber and providing the labour. So we're constantly looking for ways to give it back to the community. And ultimately, obviously, our aim's not to be needed at all. That's the aim.
Sure. And it's interesting, those principles that you put in place, they're regarded as really, really important developmental principles, the one of local empowerment, participatory approaches with the community, and also sourcing locally as well. So, and what's interesting, I think also people will probably want to hear a little bit more about, is that link with the learning in schools. And I think it's such a nice model that you give people a meal at the start of the day, which obviously helps concentration and encourages people to come to school. And it's really amazing that you have this impact on 32% of primary children in Malawi. So do you, any stories you can share with us about the impact on student learning at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's very dramatic. It's a simple thing we're doing, but the impact is absolutely enormous. And we know that in different ways. We know it, anecdotally. And I can tell some stories of that just through the lives we see change. But also, we're very committed to impact assessments, really monitoring and evaluating our programs and constantly wanting to learn and check, are we doing this the right way? Is it having the impact we hope it's having? It's not just a nice idea, is it really, really working? We recently did a 5-year impact assessment in Malawi and Zambia. And just basic things, Bob, like just enrollment for starters. In Malawi, on average, there was an increase of 39% over a 3-year period from the start of Mary's Meals. So huge impact, just first of all, in getting children who were previously out of school because of hunger in school, you know, and then there's a whole population, probably globally, you know, maybe 65 million children who are in school, but who are suffering chronic hunger and are too hungry to learn, you know, and that takes the form of kids falling asleep early in the day in class. We see that so often where kids are hungry, or it can have an impact in the form of kids having very, very poor attendance because they're so often sick because of their lack of adequate nutrition. So, you know, we see a massive improvement in attendance rates as well as enrollment increases. And then over a longer period of time, harder to measure sometimes than those other two, but we see improvements in academic performance as well, for obvious reasons. When kids aren't falling asleep in class, when they are coming to school every day rather than just now and again, of course they're going to do better academically. So we see that as well. So those educational benefits, impacts, they're very, very significant, you know, and you know, I've mentioned those in Malawi, but we see those repeated really in every country, in every different environment that we serve the daily meal, and we see similar things happen. In fact, we see even greater increases in enrollment than that in some countries where even bigger numbers of children are out of school, like in South Sudan, where only 50% of the children of South Sudan go to school currently. You know, not much better in Liberia. You know, so there we see even bigger numbers of kids coming to school for the first time. So, you know, again, it's not everything. I'm not sitting here, Bob, like pretending this is just some kind of magic wand and everything's suddenly okay. It's not. There are lots of other factors here. There are lots of other constraints around education beyond. I'm talking about primary school really here. Nurseries and primary schools are where we predominantly feed. You know, those kids, you know, we can keep them in primary school by feeding them there. The opportunities beyond that, sadly, we know are very, very limited. And there are, of course, a whole range of other challenges in these children's lives. So I'm not pretending suddenly everything's okay, but the difference between being able to read and write and armed with even that basic education and not, we know is enormous from a development point of view.
And it's one of the, you talked a lot about earlier about poverty. It's one of the keys that is potentially can unlock that poverty for people, is having a good education. So I think even though you're monitoring and evaluating your impact, it must be your impact will go beyond, I'm sure, you know, beyond in terms of future years of those children. So yeah,
no, that's right. That's right, Bob. Absolutely. It's kind of ripples out, doesn't it? And it goes through the generations, you know, because even a parent who's had the benefit of school, you know, that's going to be so different for their children, you know. And I mentioned, you know, that's the kind of statistical side of it. One of the beautiful things about doing this work right now is this whole amazing group of young people who are emerging from school now and who say, you know, if it wasn't for Mary's Meals, I never would have gone to school. You know, I might not be alive if it wasn't for Mary's Meals. And there they are in further education, or they've started their own businesses, or they're in some kind of employment. And it's such a powerful thing, you know, to meet those young people, and some of them becoming these amazing leaders in their communities. They're the people that are ultimately going to change things. Like you say, that's how this the impact of this goes on and on beyond those immediate things you can measure, and we see that in a very powerful way. And just, you know, almost everything we can think of in terms of the challenges facing the poorest countries can't really be changed without a basic education for all. You know, whether it's electing better governments or holding governments to account or tackling corruption or HIV/AIDS, everything requires that, at least that, so that people have some hope of winning those battles, I think.
I think that's why your model's so unique. You know, food and education is so powerful, and you can see it's the you know, the future impact's going to have an enormous result for those people. So we talked earlier, Magnus, about the increases recently in chronic hunger and food insecurity across the world, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. This was obviously pre-COVID. So these statistics were getting worse pre-COVID-19. and the outbreak of the pandemic. One of the things I've seen in my work at the Fairtrade Foundation is we've seen a real negative impact on livelihoods. So we've seen, particularly in certain sectors like flowers in East Africa, in places like Kenya, where people have just lost their markets overnight just because of transport restrictions and various other factors in terms of movement of labour, so on and so forth. So organisations like Mary's Meals are needed now more than ever. How have you dealt with COVID-19 pandemic so far? What challenges has it brought you as an organisation?
Yeah, I mean they've been huge, you know, and just to reinforce what you're saying, Bob, the need is greater than ever, isn't it? And it was great before this began, you know, and I think the global predictions are quite frightening, aren't they, in terms of, you know, talk of maybe the numbers of chronically hungry doubling. You know, I don't think anyone knows for sure, do they? Of course they don't, but, you know, we're certainly seeing on the ground huge needs. And as you say, I think, you know, maybe particularly in urban areas, you know, I think there's a certain resilience, maybe in rural areas where people tend to be subsistence farmers. It's not that it's not having an impact there, but it's a different impact in people who are earning their livelihood, and then suddenly their livelihood has gone. You know, so, you know, but back in March when this started to unfold with the virus and schools started closing in one country after another in the countries we work in, I suppose it's one of the few moments since we began Mary's Meals that I was really thinking for a moment, how do we go forward, you know, and then add to that the whole question mark about, you know, could our income hold up? Most of our support is in the form of grassroots, many small donations, you know.
Sure.
And so there was a real sense of this is something different than we've ever experienced before. How do we go forward? And it's been an incredible few months, really. You know, on the program side, very quickly our teams engaged with the local communities, began talking to the governments, to the education authorities, to the health authorities, and you know, respecting the local public health policies being introduced. We found ways to keep feeding the children at home. You know, very simply, you know, through working through those community networks that were already running Mary's Meals, by inviting parents or community leaders to come to our stores at the schools on a, you know, an organised, allotted time basis, and to take the food home to cook for their children at home. And that way we've been reaching the vast majority of the children in schools. And you know, we really thank God for that, because you know, you can suspend schools for very good reasons at times, this being an example of it, but you can't suspend children eating every day, can you? You know, so that's been, you know, amazing that's been possible. And then on the other side of it, you know, our income has held up in this incredible ways. There's been another example of how good people are, how willing people are to share some of what they have, so that children might at least eat. You know, so it's been a challenging time, Bob. It's also been a time of amazing learning. I'm sure lots of organisations are feeling that, and we're certainly feeling that in Mary's Meals. There's definitely things we've learned during this experience that I think will make us stronger, make us better able to serve the children going forward. So, you know, so there are some opportunities amidst all this challenge as well, I think. But in saying that, you know, I think we all want this to come to an end as soon as possible, and we do see schools starting to reopen now in some of our programme countries, and some normality coming back there, thankfully.
Yeah, and I guess it's interesting that your kind of participatory community approach, and sounds as though it's enabled you to adapt and go straight to the household rather than using the school as the hub. And I think that's a testament to the model, isn't it, of that resilience that you've built.
Absolutely, Bob. I think it's clear never. We wouldn't have been able to do this if it hadn't been for what you've just said, for those deep relationships and trust, you know, that allowed us to react, you know. And also I think that that kind of simplicity and clarity of purpose that Mary's Meals has, the kind of sharp focus, it meant there wasn't like a lot of head scratching about what do we do. We know we've made a promise to feed the child every day. That's what we have to do, you know. So it allowed us to really move to how do we adapt the model very quickly without too much head scratching around that. So yeah, no, it's been a time of great learning, though, that's for sure.
Yeah, and what was amazing about what you've just said, and it shows the power of sharing and giving, was the fact that your donations have held up, which is really, really reassuring. And that's where I want to move on to now. I want to talk about the power of collective giving and sharing, because that's what brings B1% together and our members. And I know that's one of the reasons why we work with you and you work with us. But, you know, if you think back to 2002, what do you think the power of that sharing and giving? How would you describe it?
Well, you know, I mean, go right back to the beginning of this work, Bob. I never planned to do this. I never ever sat down and said I'm going to start a new organisation. And I won't go into details now, but I got involved in doing this work maybe 10 years before Mary's Meals was born, just through some of us trying to do a very small thing for the people in Bosnia. And I only intended to take 1 week's holiday. I was a fish farmer, to do that and then go back to work. And the reason that never happened was because the little appeal we made in our village here in Scotland snowballed. You know, that incredible outpouring of generosity we experienced at the beginning just kept repeating itself. It was almost like we couldn't stop it. You know, it was like, you know, we were running to keep up with this kind of tidal wave of kindness and goodness. And that's really what it felt like, you know, all the years, nearly 30 years now. That's still what it feels like in Mary's Meals. You know, that my experience over and over again of people is they are so good. People want to share. You know, most people want the hungry child to be fed. You know, most people don't want other human beings to suffer in any way. I think what people need to know, though, is that they personally can do something that makes a difference. They need to know that their gift will become effective in someone else's life. And I think if you can do that, if you can present something to people respectfully, you know, respecting them as people, over and over again, our own experiences, then people want to help. People want to share. I think it's something very deep in the human person that wants to do that. You know, and Jan mentioned at the beginning that I've just written another book that's just been published, and it's really about that topic. You know, it's about, I kind of have a fascination all these years with just how good people are. You know, despite what we tend to read in the media every day and all the bad news, my experience is the opposite, and especially actually in places of extreme poverty or places of extreme circumstances, the way human beings respond after, say, an earthquake in Haiti or the tsunami, or, you know, that's where I've seen some of the most amazing examples of people sharing. And you know, we don't have to be wealthy to start sharing what we have, or to start giving of ourselves in some way. And, you know, I suppose one of the things I also noticed all these years, Bob, is just that the people who do that the best, that I really am inspired by and look up to, tend also to be the people who are most joyful, who are most fulfilled, who are most, you know, at peace with themselves. You know, because I think we're made to be like that, people who share.
It's real fascinating, and certainly we've experienced that within our collective of B1%, where we're asking people to do a simple thing, which was use 1% of their salary on a monthly basis. So some people just give one-off donations, but most people give 1% of their salary to actually work with organisations like Mary's Meals, who have a real impact on the ground. We can together, you know, collectively make that amount a bigger amount to actually have a bigger impact on the work that you do. And I wonder, when you first came across B1%, where did you see the kind of power of that collective partnership?
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. It resonates so much, you know, with how we think about it as well. Because, you know, I think that thing you talk about, that word that struck me tonight that you use about collective, it's not really a word that we use so much in our vocabulary, but it's really struck me because I think that's part of it as well, isn't it? That people can think, oh, that little thing I'm doing, it's not really going to make a difference, you know? But when it's part of the collective, it's easier to demonstrate, well, it's not insignificant. You know, when you put all that together, it's something amazing, you know. And when we talk about Mary's Meals around the world now, we like to talk about it as just a series of lots and lots of little acts of love. You know, we're all doing something small, you know, and it might feel insignificant, but when you put it all together, look, you know, look at what's happening. This is something incredible, you know. So I love that about B1%. I think it's very much the same concept, the same belief, you know, the same approach, and you know, the same confidence in people's goodness and people's willingness to do this. If we give people the right opportunity and the right reassurance around it.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And some of our board have been out to visit the work that you're doing in Malawi. I know that they're so inspired by it. You know, Jan was there last year with a 14-year-old son, and Steve and Matt have been out there before with some other our supporters, and they just come back with some amazing stories. And I hope one day to go out there and have a look at what you do as well. It sounds just really inspirational, and I think very, very joyful. So
yeah,
just one final question for you, because I know we're a lot of people are wanting to ask questions. Is thoughts on the future? You've obviously, you know, on reflection, wrote this book, and you set up in 2002. What would be your hopes for the future?
Well, our vision is that every child in this world would be able to eat one good meal every day in their place of education. That's a long-held vision. I know at the beginning, when we started speaking like that, people would look at us like we'd lost the plot a bit. But, you know, I think really genuinely that vision burns more brightly than ever. You know, that thing we talked about earlier, there's enough food in the world. You know, it's not mad to think that every child would eat every day. It's much more crazy that any child would die of hunger-related causes in this world of plenty. You know, so that vision burns brightly. That's possible. I really believe it's possible. Obviously, it's not just the work of Mary's Meals. We hope by doing this well, it encourages other people to take this approach. It encourages governments in the developing world to prioritize this. You know, and we also don't pretend to have any idea of when. You know, we're maybe a slightly unusual organization in that we're a little bit adverse to the big target thing, you know, being driven by numbers, because we want to respect people, you know, and recognize that I think this year's shown us more than ever, we're not really in control of everything, are we? And you know, we can make a mistake sometimes in trying to predict the future too much. So for us, it's very much about one child at a time, the next child waiting, you know. So we've got a big vision, and then it's about the next child, you know. So right now we've got a list of a waiting list of schools waiting for Mary's Meals, and we just keep working till we can say yes, one at a time.
Brilliant. And such a good message that the work continues, and as we said earlier, it's more needed now than ever, these kind of collaborations between organizations like ourselves. And it's just been a pleasure and a real honor to have this conversation with you, Magnus, and thank you very much for everybody for listening. And I'm going to hand back over to Jan now, who's probably been waiting to ask us questions.
Thank you, Bob. I think I could just listen to you guys all day. We have several questions that have come through, mostly about Mary's Meals, but I will just go through them, and you can choose who answers them. I think this one's from a good friend of B1%, Phil Schluter, and he says, living with 4 kids who want to live normal lives here in the UK, I find it a constant battle to balance living in this culture and economy whilst knowing the reality in countries like Malawi. And really the question is, how do you deal with the tension of living in the UK where the cost of living is quite high, when seeing the amazing impact that only £1 can have on lives in other countries? I'll ask that to you first, Magnus, but Bob, you may want to answer that as well.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I think it's a very hard question. You know, I think there is risks that we can just become people that feel guilty all day long, and that doesn't that doesn't necessarily make anything better, you know, and I think we shouldn't feel like that. You know, I think it might be good to feel very grateful for what we do have, or very blessed for what we have, or whatever words we like to use. So I think that's good, and that's healthy. And obviously, you know, what we're all talking about today is sharing some of what we have. And if everyone shared some of what they had, then there wouldn't be children going a whole day without food in this world. So, you know, I think that's all good, and there's so much we can do to improve things, to move the work of Mary's Meals, or the work of B1%, or the work of other organisations forward. But that doesn't have to come with a big guilt complex, or walking about feeling miserable all day about what we have, because you know, we can rejoice in that too. We don't feeling bad about that doesn't necessarily help anyone.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that, because it's about having the motivation to do something about it, and knowing that actually what you're doing is having an impact, which I think is important. It's important to know that your donation, or the sharing and the raising of funds and money is actually having an impact. And I think that's why it's important to see, you know, those statistics and have a simple model that you can believe in. And don't forget, food insecurity is not just a developing economy problem. It's also, we are going to see it even more so in advanced Western capitalists, you know, advanced, I say in inverted commas, capitalist societies as well. We see a chronic, you know, real rapid increase in food insecurity in the United Kingdom. So let's not think that it's something distant. It's a problem shared by for all of us, really.
Excellent. Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Magnus, as well. Bob mentioned in your talk there that we had the privilege to go to Malawi, to Chitikale school, with my 14-year-old son. And when I started reading the Shed That Fed a Million Children, and you start off with the story of Edward, who's 14, obviously it's very emotional for me. But as a family, we made a decision to expose our children to those experiences, and, you know, let them see firsthand what life is like. And like you said, Magnus, really to be grateful for what we do have, but also to do something. Just been reading another book, and one of the conclusions one of the women makes in it is, she said, it's no longer acceptable for me to do nothing. So that's how I feel about this. That's how I feel about lots of different things, but it's no longer acceptable to do nothing. So doing something is the way forward. So thank you both for responding to that. I don't know if you know what happened to Edward. Did he get his dream of?
Well, yeah, I mean, there is a follow-up story to Edward. It's tough, you know, because I had that encounter with Edward, and we started Mary's Meals, but we didn't start Mary's Meals in his part of Malawi, and I lost touch, and we tried several times to find him again. We never did. And then actually, I think it was when I was writing that book, The Shed That Fed, tried again to find him, and I did find him back in the village where I first met him. And it was hard, because I knew he'd missed a school, and it was too late for him, really, in a sense, Mary's Meals, and he is still living a really hard life. I went back there more recently, met his wife and child. Edward had moved on at this point. But one of the beautiful things is his son, Blessing, is eating Mary's Meals in school now. So Edward might have missed out, but his son hasn't, and his wife's volunteering to cook for Mary's Meals every day as well. So they're still very much part of the Mary's Meals story as well.
Wow, that's incredible. That's an incredible end to that story. How wonderful. I've got a couple of questions, Magnus, for you around Mary's Meals. It's a little off topic. I'm not sure if it's something that you do, but do you have any idea of how many of the mums whose kids that you feed have access to family planning, and if they have any access to that, if it has any impact on your work in developing countries? And also, do you do anything around gender inequality in terms of that family planning and that choice?
No, I mean, for us, in our approach with Mary's Meals is by providing people enough to eat every day, they can make their own choices, you know, and by enabling people to access education, they have more possibility to make their own choices, you know, whether it be about family size or anything else. You know, that's their that's their choice. Would be our approach to that. So so it's not unconnected choices in life, not just in that topic, on a whole load of things. I think that is one of the things I think we definitely take for granted in wealthier societies, is the amount of choices we have around a whole load of things. And the poorest people in the world don't tend to have choices, so no, but I would really, for me, it's personally, I think it's really important to respect families' own choices about those things rather than imposing other ideas on them. I think that's their choice. Yeah.
Thank you. I love what you said about Mary's Meals in terms of your ethos, wanting to do one thing and do it really well.
Yeah, exactly, and that's really important, Jan, for us. We're not experts in anything else, and I think that that is how organisations. There's lots of ways we can go wrong, and we certainly don't know all the answers. But I think mission drift is definitely one of the risks with organisations as they grow, and us kidding ourselves on that we can, and for good reason. Sometimes we see the need, so we just want to try and do something about it. But they can take us down wrong paths as well. So at least for us, that sharp focus and simplicity is very important for us.
Excellent. I just have a couple more questions. I think we're okay for time. This is from Matt, and his question is, what's the biggest challenge facing Mary's Meals, and how can people who are watching this webinar, how can they support and get involved?
Biggest challenge. Yeah, I mean, for me, the biggest challenge really is how we find a way to reach those children who are still waiting as quickly as possible. Because there's something very simple here that works. We know it works, and we know there's a whole load of schools waiting for it. So how do we reach them more quickly? And so much of the answer to that lies in how do we spread the word about Mary's Meals, because as we talked about earlier, when people hear about Mary's Meals, generally they want to help. So we're not an organisation that has big budgets for advertising or PR. So we rely hugely on people taking it into their hearts and believing in this, and then finding ways to raise awareness, to tell the story. And so that one of the biggest challenges for us is how do we help that happen? How do we enable that process to happen? And we're always looking for help and new ideas and innovations around that as well. I would say in terms of challenge, one other thing I would just throw in there is, for us, we also want to avoid it being just about numbers, just about how fast can we grow, because our values are really, really important to us. So we like to say the way we do this work is as important as the end results, and when I talk about that, I'm talking about things like really making sure we continue to respect the person in front of us, the person we're serving, the volunteers, the people who support us, and not becoming disconnected as we grow, not starting to treat people just like numbers or ATM machines to extract money out of. So in terms of challenge, it's a challenge. How do we keep growing like that and want to grow fast to reach those kids that are waiting, but not at the expense of doing this the right way as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a few more questions that have come through whilst we've been talking. Just a story that somebody has commented from Jacqueline Cook. She has told us she knows a retired teacher who tutors, and she takes no fee, and she asks for donations to Mary's Meals instead. So that's fantastic to hear.
Lovely.
Jacqueline. Another question. I've got one for you, Bob, but I'm just going to ask this one quickly to Magnus. What do you know now that you wished that you'd known back in the early days of Mary's Meals?
Lots of things. Try to pick one. I don't know, probably, some of the things I'm talking about tonight about confidence and just how amazing people are, probably took me quite a long time to learn that, and that, you know, to really have confidence that that a mission like Mary's Meals or B1% really can grow to change the world. Certainly for some of us, it takes quite a lot of time and quite a lot of experience of that reality before we really believe it. Yeah.
Mm. Excellent. Bob, can you give us any insight into what we can do as consumers to make sure that food producers in the communities we work in aren't being exploited?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a number of. I think there's not one silver bullet, and I think the question is directed mainly at perhaps smallholders. Is it in developing economies? Would you say?
I don't know.
Yeah. So, well, I'll tackle that, but then I'll also say something about the United Kingdom as well, because we've seen that COVID-19 has kind of exposed some of the frailties in our own food system as well. But in terms of developing economies, I mean, I think there are, you know, assurance mechanisms, certification schemes that obviously, I would say this, wouldn't I, with my Fairtrade hat on, but Fairtrade I've seen really have an impact because it's the only certification scheme that provides an economic premium for farmers and a social premium. The money, it's the farmers then decide what to do with the social premium, so they're empowered to do that. It's not a you know, a foundation from a retailer in the UK that says you've got to do this, that, and the other. It's the farmers themselves who decide. And I think what's been interesting in the COVID-19 pandemic is that there's been a lot of pre-contracting, a lot of pre-financing in Fairtrade. So Fairtrade has paid the economic premium up front before even the shipments arrived in the United Kingdom, which has helped the farmers invest in hygiene, invest in, you know, in factories, to organise their factories, you know, banana processing plants, to be socially distanced and to be safe. So I've seen really the impact of that economic premium make a real difference to farmers in developing economies. In terms of the United Kingdom, what we did see, I think, at the start of in March, was a real kind of collapse of the hospitality sector in the United Kingdom, and a lot of farmers supply the hospitality sector, whether that's restaurants, food service, or organisations like Pret a Manger or whatever. Quickly, consumers going to talk to farmers and do those direct relationships has been and using digital technology to aggregate supply and kind of click and collect kind of approaches with farmers and with their local community has been really one of the few plus points out of the pandemic, is that relocalizing of food supply.
Agreed.
So those would be some of the things I would say to that question.
Thank you for that, Bob. Yeah, we've all seen that locally. I think my brother is a smallholder food producer. He has a fruit farm in Dorset, and they did exactly that. And it's been happening all over the country, which is incredible to see.
Yeah.
We do have a couple more questions, but I'm afraid we're actually running out of time. So I'm just going to draw this to a close now, and really just thank you both so much for giving of your time and contributing to this conversation this evening. I've appreciated it so much, and I know that everybody who has been watching has really appreciated it as well. My phone keeps buzzing. I don't know if you can hear it. I keep getting messages of how much everyone's appreciating it. So thank you both to Bob and to Magnus. And just a reminder to everyone watching that B1%, we fund a diverse range of charities each month with our 1% collective pot, which includes Mary's Meals, obviously. And for the next 3 months, if anyone signs up over the next 48 hours to give monthly to B1%, we've pledged to match that fund over the next 3 months. So your giving up to Christmas will be matched by B1%. So I'd encourage you to go to our website, b1%.org, check it out, find out a little bit more about us. And if you feel challenged about the conversation that you've heard this evening, I challenge you to sign up and give regularly so that we can continue to support fantastic organisations like Mary's Meals, amongst others as well. So just a final thanks to you both. Thank you, Magnus. I've loved meeting you and listening to you.
Thank you, and thank you, Bob, for the conversation, and just thank everyone that supports B1% and through that Mary's Meals. You know, please know what you're doing is making a massive difference. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Magnus, and thanks, Jan, for being such a great host.
Yeah, thank you, Jan.
It's great to chat to you both. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye now.
Stay safe, everyone.
Bye.